Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we are going to paint a hot and glowing volcanic eruption. Make sure you check out the video description below for a list of materials for today's painting, as well as some links to the USGS website where you can find several public domain images of volcanoes to use for references. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you can paint with me every week. Now let's get started. Okay, today's canvas is brand new, fresh out of the package. I did not gesso it or wet the back. And what I'm going to do first is just kind of sketch out my composition. Now, I'm using this image here as kind of a guide for the composition. I'm going to do the volcano a little bit different. Now, this image comes from the USGS, and they are, I believe they're all public domain images, but it's best to check any individual images that you find. This one is public domain, so using images from the USGS is kind of a cool way to get some great images for volcanoes and other land formations. So I'm just going to take a pencil. It's just a regular pencil. You could use chalk or anything. And I'm just going to basically sketch out my elements. Now I know that I want the top of my volcano to come up not quite to the middle of my canvas. So I'm just going to kind of loosely sketch that in there. It will change as I start filling in all of the elements. So if there's anything I don't like, it doesn't matter. I'll just kind of start right there. And just loosely bring this down. And I don't think I want it to go over quite that far, so we'll stay right here. And I'll bring it down about like that. Maybe I want this side to come down a little bit more. Then I am gonna have, kind of the lava explosion out the top. I'm just gonna kind of say where that's gonna go, just so I have an idea. And I will paint over this, so you don't have to worry about making it perfect. I like to sketch it out sometimes because then it kind of solidifies in my mind where those elements are gonna go. So even after I've painted over it, I pretty much know where I put those lines. And then we'll have like some smoke coming from right about here next to the fire and up that way. And that's really the basic sketch. Now I'm gonna start by filling in the sky, and I'm gonna use my 1-inch flat brush, wet it pretty good in my jar, and then I'm gonna wipe off the extra drips. I don't want my water running all over the place. Now I have ultramarine and Diox purple and a little bit of titanium white, and I'm just gonna grab some ultramarine and Diox. You could use any different blue if you like. If you don't have ultramarine and you wanna use phthalo or cobalt, that's perfectly fine. Just grab some of those. I'm gonna start in this corner. I want it to be fairly dark on this side, and we'll have a little bit of a lighter sky down toward this side. So I'm just gonna do my little lazy X's back and forth. I'm okay if a little bit of the brush stroke still shows. But if you're not, see how I'm putting a good amount of pressure that lays the paint down? If you don't want those brush strokes showing, just lighten your pressure and just kind of dust over it. My brush is touching, but it's not bending at all. And that'll get rid of some of those brush stroke lines. A lot in that corner anyway is going to be covered up by our smoke, so it really doesn't matter all that much. A little bit more of that same mixture. Right over my fire, it doesn't matter. And now on this side, I'm gonna grab just a little bit of white, not a ton, and we'll start lightening this a bit. I think I do want just a little more white in there than that. And light pressure to bring it up so there's not a hard line between the darker and the lighter color. More white this time. Start right below that color. Just lay down the bulk of my paint. Light pressure to blend out any lines and to take it up into the previous color. And I still think I'd like to go a little lighter, particularly down here. So I'm just gonna grab some more white. And we'll fill in this side. I'm only gonna use the purple and the blue. There might still be a tiny bit of white on my brush, but it shouldn't be enough to make any difference over here. And then right here in the middle where it meets that lighter side, I'm just gonna lighten my pressure a bit to kind of streak them together. There we go. Notice I'm not worrying about the edges of my volcano. Like I said, that's all pretty much gonna change. But you don't need to worry about filling it in with this color because we're gonna paint it over very, very dark, almost black. All right, now before we move on, I wanna let this dry because the next step is I'm gonna start doing the smoke and the kind of lava explosion coming out of the top, and I don't wanna pick up any of that purple. Okay, now we're gonna start on our smoke, and I'm gonna use my number 6 cloud brush. And I know that this looks really, really blue, but it really does lean closer to Diox than to the blue. But whichever way you have it is perfectly fine. I guess my camera just doesn't like to pick up this much purple. So I'm using my cloud brush dry for now. I will have to wash it off and then it will be wet for other parts, but we'll deal with that later. So I picked up a little bit of black. Now I'm not gonna use black solid by itself on any part of this painting. So I'm just gonna get a little bit of it. See, not a ton. I'm not using a lot of paint here. And I'm gonna pull in some of my Diox purple and my Ultramarine Blue and just mix those together. I just want a very dark color that still leans a little bit to the blue-purple side. There's not a ton of paint on here. Now I'm gonna use about 1/2 foot pressure. Remember we talked about that before. This is 1/2 foot pressure. So if you think about your foot on the ground, if your foot is flat on the ground, that's full foot pressure. If you're kind of rocked up onto your toes a little bit, that would be 1/2 foot. So that's 1/2 foot, that's full foot. So we're using 1/2 foot pressure. I'm just gonna kind of lightly start scrubbing in some smoke. I'm not trying to cover all of that underpainting. Just giving kind of a dark smoky effect. Take it all the way to the edge of your canvas. Don't be afraid and like stop right before the edges because then it's gonna look squished into your canvas. Let it go all the way off the edge. Pull it out this way. We're not trying to make clouds or anything, so don't get intimidated. Just scrubbing a little bit of some smoke on there. I don't think my paint was fully dry because I'm lifting just a little bit of it, so make sure that your canvas is completely dry before you do this. Take it out there and off the edge a bit. And I'm gonna take this color about halfway to where I want my fire. So I know my fire was right about here. So I'm gonna take this dark color about halfway, about right to there. Okay, I think that's good for the dark color. I'm not gonna wash off my brush just yet. I'm gonna get some Quinacridone. Now, the colors that I'm using today, I am using all heavy body paint. And you don't have to use heavy body paint for the black, the white, the blue, and the purple. But the Quinacridone, the cadmium red, the cadmium orange, and then I will be using cadmium yellow. I would recommend that you're using heavy body simply because in the cadmiums at least, they're very opaque. You can lay even the yellow right over top of pure black and it will cover it. With the Liquitex Basics, they're more transparent and you'll have a harder time. You can still do it, you might have to apply your paint a little bit heavier. So I'm gonna go into my Quinacridone. I'm still not picking up a ton of paint. just a little bit on each side of my brush. I'm going to start up into this darker color, so right about here with the same brush stroke. I'm not scrubbing it quite as hard because I don't want to lose that color. The quinacridone is not real opaque. It is still pretty transparent, a little more opaque than the basics. But what the quinacridone is going to do is create kind of a transition from the dark into the reds. And it's also going to help, especially on our mountain, kind of seem like a reflection from the glow of the lava on the rocks. So we'll just get some of this up in here. You can even take little pokes of it up here that you can just barely see. Even if you don't actually see it when you look at it, it will be enough to just kind of keep a glow going. So hopefully there you can just see a bit of the warmth from that quinacridone. That's really all we're looking for here. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now I'm going to wash off my brush. But I don't want to use my brush real wet while I'm doing the smoke, so I'm going to get my paper towel and squeeze as much of the moisture out of it as possible. Okay, now I'm going to go into my cadmium red. And I'm not picking up much, a little bit less than I picked up of the other colors. I'm going to start right about where my black ends. Again, with that half-foot pressure, but a little bit lighter pressure than before. And get it right up into there. This is going to start being kind of the firelight on that smoke. We can even take just a little bit. I'm using almost no pressure here. Kind of get it up into here. Little bits of some reflection of that cadmium red up in here. Not a ton. If you happen to get too much color, it's not a big deal. Just let it dry and put that dark color back over top of it. Make sure that you walk away from it as far as you can get, 5-6 feet to look at it, see if you want to add more somewhere, if it's looking the way you want it to look. Get a little bit of that off to the edge there as well. I think I'm going to pull that down just a bit farther. A little bit heavier application of the paint. I'm not scrubbing it out quite so much. And I'm going to go into my cadmium orange. Again, not very much of it. I'm going to start right here where the red ended. And same thing. Just take little tiny bits of it up into here. I love putting these hot colors against this cool purple background. It's very, very pleasing to me. A couple of brighter spots. I think that'll be good. I'm going to stand back and make sure. Not too bad. I think I do want to grab just a little more of my cad red, get some up in here. And now we can start on our lava explosion. So to do that, I'm gonna use this natural bristle brush. It's about 1/2 inch across. And remember, it's got these stiff bristles, kind of flared out all over the place. Super cheap brushes. You should be able to get them in a value pack just about anywhere. I'm gonna wet it in my jar a bit, wipe it off really good on the edge. These brushes hold a ton of water, so you wanna be really aware of that. I don't want it to be overly wet. What we're gonna do first is do kind of the sparks that are flying off of there. So I'm gonna get some of my Cad Red. And I guess I do want this to be a little bit wetter than that. I just barely touch the brush into the water because I don't want it flowing all over the place. That's too wet, but definitely wetter than I had it. I'm gonna pull a little bit of orange into that too. There we go. So see, it's not flowing, but it's definitely a lot thinner than it is right out of the tube. I'm gonna scoop some up. I want a good amount of paint on my brush. And if you need to draw your fire out again so you know where to do this, that's fine. I'm not gonna worry about that. I'm gonna take my brush and start spraying little flicks. Notice how I've got my brush like this. When I do that, it's gonna kind of shoot them like that. Kind of make them look dynamic, like they're exploding out of the volcano. See how kind of streaked? Like we don't want that when we're doing stars, but for this, it's exactly what I want. Give it a good, powerful flick, and you get some streaks. Kind of runs down the bristles every once in a while, so you gotta scrape it off and put it back into the tip of the brush. So just some. We don't want to get too overboard with this. And then I'm going to start flicking it right here where I know I want the fire, just to build it up a little bit right there. If you have a toothbrush or something, you could use that for this part as well. Now I'm just going to go into my orange. I didn't clean off my brush, just getting more orange in there. Again, pretty much concentrating it to where I know I'm going to put the fire. The little bits that come out from around that is exactly what I want, because then it'll look like they're coming out of this fire. But by concentrating it where I want the fire and not outwardly, then I can make sure that I don't get too much of it going on up here and that the sparks don't end up looking disconnected from the fire. Okay, I've cleaned off my brush and now I'm gonna get yellow. Just cadmium yellow by itself. But we're gonna do the same thing. I'm really gonna get a few of those up in here because that'll be a nice contrast against the dark and they'll look very bright like sparks. I know this just looks like a splatter paint nightmare right here, but don't worry, it's not gonna look like that. Now I'm just gonna get a bit of white, mix it with my yellow. Still want it to be mostly yellow. And we can start filling in where we want the fire. I'm mostly just gonna kind of scrape and dab a little bit. I'm picking up all of those sparks and mixing it in, and that's okay. See, I'm very lightly scraping. My brush isn't really touching. It's not bending at all. Just scraping up, and then every once in a while, just kind of dab. Bring it up kind of high in here. I like that it's picking up that orange and red, kind of mixing. I just wiped my brush off really good on a paper towel. I'm gonna get more white, more yellow, nice bright color. This is a drier color. There's not as much water in my brush. And I'm just gonna kind of start scraping. And if that's too wet, we can let it dry and come back. Yeah, I think I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna let that dry. Okay, it's pretty dry now. So my brush is cleaned off. A little bit of white, a little bit of yellow, nice bright color. And I'm gonna come in here and with a little bit more paint, a little bit of a drier brush, a little more pressure, I'm gonna start scratching my fire into there. All the way to the bottom. Again, don't worry about what any of that looks like. We're gonna paint over the volcano. You just wanna make sure you don't have, you know, like straight lines like that. It's kind of exploding and bursting out, so, you know, dab it a bit. And don't try and cover all of that color, particularly at the edges. That's gonna help it seem like it's got that glow. Just kind of scratch it. Let it be soft and kind of fuzzy. I am going outside of it just a little bit. Want nice, fuzzy, kind of exploded edges here. Let's get just yellow. Just kind of pop some bright spots in here. But remember, with a volcano and lava, the darker the color is, so red would be our darkest color, the cooler it is. And the lighter the color, so white, that's the hottest part. And this part is quite hot. So we are gonna add some almost pure white. I still have yellow on my brush, so it's not gonna end up being pure white. Just kind of scratch some of that into there. And I feel like it would be the hottest right down here at the base. So I'm really gonna get some of that light color down here. Don't be afraid to go nice and light. The more you allow yourself to get as close to pure white as you can, the brighter this is going to seem, the hotter it's going to seem. I'm not picking up a ton of paint, but I'm not putting a lot of pressure on my brush either, so wherever it touches, it's really staying. Nice and bright down here. Nice and bright. And then I just picked up a little drip of water on the end of my brush. I'm just gonna mix that water in with the paint that's on my brush. Tiny bit more. Maybe I will add just a hint more white into that. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to try and keep it concentrated around the edges here. And a little bit more water. It wasn't really spreading very well. And I think that's good for now. We can come back and make touch-ups later if we want to. Okay, now we can start painting in our volcano, the mountain part itself. And I'm going to use my 1/2" flat brush, wetting it in the jar and wiping it on the edge. Now again, I'm not going to paint in anything in this painting in solid black. So I'm going to use some of my black, just a bit, and I'm going to mix it with the purple and the blue. That's going to help there be less of a disconnect between the warm colors that I put on here. The warm colors against the black are gonna make the black seem very flat, and the warm colors will seem kind of disconnected. So that's why we're using the purple and blue in there. I'm gonna start by just kind of reshaping the top of my mountain. And if your white yellow is still wet and you're picking up some of it, I wouldn't worry about it. I don't think it's a big deal. Just give it kind of an irregular shape in there. And don't keep your mountain, right up against where your flame is. Kind of take it off the edge just a little bit. I'm using these short, kind of clipped brush strokes so that it gets some irregularity in the shape of the rock. I don't want to just take it and streak it down and have this perfectly conical shaped mountain here. And same thing over here. I just picked up a tiny bit of water there to make my paint flow a little smoother. And now that I've got that, I can fill it all in. Okay, and now you can kind of see how that color has that purpley warmth to it. And I didn't really stress getting rid of the brush stroke lines. I just made sure that I kind of took my brush strokes in a direction that I felt like fit the mountain and worked with it, so that if some of that shows up, it will just help add a little bit of some shadows and highlights, so I don't have to do quite as much work for it. I did pick up a little bit of my white here. I'm just gonna lay a hint of this darker color over that edge. All right, now we're gonna let this dry again because we're gonna start working with the reds, and I don't wanna pick any of this up, so maybe 15-20 minutes. Okay, I think I am gonna pop these highlights just a little bit more in the lava shooting up. So I'm still using my natural bristle brush. It's barely damp. I'm just picking up a little bit of white and just kind of get some in there. Mr. Moon is being crazy and running around in circles today. This is all dry, by the way. Okay, now hopefully you'll be able to see this next part. With this being really dark, I'm gonna use quinacridone, and the quinacridone's kind of transparent, so hopefully you can see this. I'm gonna use my number 6 round, and I wet it in my jar, and I'm gonna get some quinacridone. See, not a ton, see how I'm kind of rolling it. That takes quite a bit of it off and keeps my brush in a nice sharp point. Now decide where you want the lava to be. You don't have to have the entire rim of the volcano covered in lava. You can leave some of the dark poking out for interest. So I'm gonna start here in some of these lower areas. You don't have to be real specific at this point. See how I'm kind of laying my brush a little bit flat? And let it kind of move in different directions. So it changes direction there maybe. You know, a mountain isn't just straight down, at an angle on each side. There might be little ridges and dips, all kinds of things. The lava may change direction. So we'll just kind of fill that in, break up the lines. This is almost like a reflection type color, so it doesn't have to be real specific. Take it down, maybe it'll branch off a bit. Especially if you're using basics, this color's not going to show up real well. I think that it will show up enough to kind of give you an idea of where you want to go and get some reflection going. Right here, I feel like there's a flat spot. So I'm going to go with that and say that my lava's coming down through here, kind of running into this flat spot here, and then maybe down that way. Just kind of out, and then as I come down, I'm kind of twisting my brush a little bit. Gives me kind of a natural shape. And I don't have to work so hard to get randomness. I'm just swiping over it to break up any hard lines. Since this is a reflection color, I don't really want any hard lines in it. So I'm just gonna kind of add these throughout, nothing real specific or amazing, just getting a bit of this on there. Maybe we will have just a little bit up here. See how I'm really just using the quarter end of the brush. I'm not using the whole length of the brush for the most part. Once in a while I'll lay it flat and just kind of streak it. For the most part, I'm just kind of dashing, see? Just get some randomness going. Sometimes these little veins of lava can meet up with another one. Maybe that one meets up there and then they flow off together that way. And now I'm going to go into my cadmium red. I didn't clean off my brush, and I think the cadmium red and this quinacridone make a really gorgeous color that seems to glow. So I'm mixing them just a little bit on my brush, but again, rolling it so I don't have a ton of paint and I've got a nice sharp point. I'm going to be a little bit more specific with where I put this color. Let's get it right up to there. Notice my brush is a little dry, so I'm getting some breaking in the colors. And I like that. I'm not worried about that. And I can get some nice soft edges there. But you can still get hard edges when you want. If you want a harder edge, either just pick up more paint or kind of roll it in the direction where you want that harder edge. See that? Whatever you prefer. I like to get that little bit of texture in there because, you know, in lava a lot of times it's not a solid color. There's a bit of a difference in the colors. And so now you can kind of see a little bit better where I put that quinacridone. I'm not trying to cover it. If some of it pokes through, that's perfectly fine. That's why I put it there. But I don't have to stay confined to that. You know, if I feel like I want to take a little bit right there where I didn't put any quinacridone, then I can do that as well. Same thing up here on the edge. You don't have to cover all of the rock. Just because you put the quinacridone there, you can leave some of that rock poking through. This is actually going to be a really similar technique to highlighting bark on a tree. Really, really similar. You're just using different colors, maybe going in different directions. You know, and just like with anything, if you don't like something, if you feel like you got too much of a color somewhere, then just let it dry and paint it over with that dark color again. Come back and work on it later. get some tiny little rivulets kind of flowing back down into that piece. See, I am going back over some of the parts I already did and just adding a little bit of a heavier color. And you can just kind of do that wherever you feel like you need it. Wherever you feel like you have a little blank spot that you don't like, just add another little bit. Doesn't have to go all the way down. Doesn't really matter how you make your lava look. You know, there's all kinds of different types of lava flows and volcanoes and different types of explosions and everything. And so you can make it look however you want. If yours doesn't look just like mine, that's perfectly fine. You know, go onto the USGS website and search for lava images or volcano images, and there's some really cool stuff out there. And I think you'll be able to find something that'll, you know, inspire you and kind of give you a direction that you want to go. The lava that I'm doing on this volcano is obviously quite different from the lava that's in the reference image that I showed you. I actually looked at several images to get an idea for the types of colors that I wanted to see, the way I wanted the lava to flow and move. And all of those were on the USGS website. So I encourage you to go there and check that out. They're all public, well, I don't know if they're all public domain images. It says that they're public domain images unless otherwise noted. So it's wise to check and make sure that the one that you like is public domain, especially if you're going to be selling the image you're painting. So see there, I'm kind of doing that almost flat kind of side swipe thing again, because I want a bit of a wider area in there, a little bit of a wider flow. My brush might be getting just a little bit too dry. I just poked the very, very end of the brush, about 1/8 of an inch into my water, and that's really going to be enough. Yeah, see, my paint is still going on almost dry brushed, but it's not quite as sticky as it was. It was getting way too sticky. And my paint is starting to dry out. This is actually the next day. So I filmed the first half of this yesterday, and then it got late in the day, and because I have a lot of natural light in my studio, if I don't film while the light is outside, then it changes too much and I get, my colors change and it's not very fun. So I had to quit last night, and I'm doing this again today. And these are the paints that I put out yesterday. And so I'll show you how I did that, how I kept these paints smooth on a paper plate overnight. I'll show you how I did that. Let's just finish up this little red bit of the lava, and then I'll do that. I love to roll my brush to get some randomness, because it decides, oh, I'm going to start going this way, and you just kind of go with it. See, all I'm doing is just kind of pushing it with my thumb, back and forth. I know that some people have a hard time with rolling, so just practice that, you know? It's just a very small movement. just pushing it with my thumb. And I'm doing that as I go through here, just lightly rolling it with my thumb. Mr. Moon says he hasn't talked in a couple of videos, so today he's gonna make up for it apparently. You can even have a little piece that doesn't seem attached to anything else. I think I'm gonna go through and throw a couple of those in. You know, because if it's an explosion, stuff gets thrown up in the air and it lands, or there might be a piece of a rock hiding it where you don't see where it's coming from. Let's even get just a bit down here. Okay, so here's how I kept my paint wet all night long. I took a damp paper towel and another paper plate. I laid that paper towel in there. I put this plate in it because otherwise the paint will evaporate out the bottom of the plate. Then I took another paper towel, I wet it really good and just squeezed it out just enough so that it wasn't dripping everywhere, but it's still quite wet. If I were to squeeze this pretty good, I would get water running down my arm. I set it in the middle. I took another paper plate, put it on top, and then I just put a jar of matte medium on top to kind of weigh it down. And that kept it wet all night long. So if you like to use paper plates like I do, that is a really easy way to not waste your paint if you can't finish a painting in one day. And I imagine as long as you kept the paper plate or the paper towel under the paper plate damp and the one inside damp, that it would last for maybe a couple of days. You'd have to keep checking on it. All right, let's go lighter. So I cleaned off my brush and I'm gonna get some of my cadmium orange. My brush was a little wetter than I wanted, so I just wiped it on a paper towel. That's gonna be better. Again, I'm not loading my brush all the way down, kind of rolling it to a point to get a bit of the paint off. I don't want blobs just yet. I'll probably come back and add some really sharp, bright spots. So we'll just come in here and we'll be selective and say this orange is right here. I'm applying it in the same way. I'm not trying to cover all of that red. In fact, in some areas, I'll make the orange quite a bit thinner. Especially in some of the small bits of lava, it might not be quite as hot because it's narrow. So it cooled off just a little bit. And again, I didn't take it all the way to the edge there. You can still see a bit of the red right there at the very top. Really just using the point. Can you see that? My brush isn't bending very much. It's really just the tip of the brush that's touching. In a few areas, I'll put a little extra pressure, but for the most part, it's just gonna be that tip there. Maybe right here where they meet, a little bit brighter. And I can skip some spots. See, and every once in a while I even take the orange outside of where the red is. It doesn't always have to be contained right in there. Kind of look at the way your lava is flowing to decide where it's going to be the hottest. So in some of these low points, like right here where the mountain comes down low, I feel like the lava would really be pouring through right there and moving pretty quickly. And so I feel like it might be pretty hot right there. So I'm going to make sure to get that nice and bright right in there. Here's another little low point maybe. And for sure right here, kind of a low point. So that lava's really coming out there. It can have a hard line if you want. It doesn't have to be dusted out. Make sure you're leaving some interest. So see, here what I mean is my orange is quite heavy right in here, and then it trails off, and then there's no orange, and then I might put just a little bit more right in there. That's gonna help make your mountain seem really dynamic, like there's some movement in there. The lava thickens and thins, it's hotter, it's cooler in places. Make sure that you're standing back to look at it. Every once in a while, get away from it. It will help you see where you might want to add some more color, where you might want to add a few more little rivulets of lava, all kinds of things. So paint a little bit and then get away from it. I edit them out all the time, but constantly while I'm painting for you guys, you know, I'll stop and walk away from my painting, look at it from the other side of the room. If you sit to paint, if you have, you know, if you don't have the ability to really get up and walk away from it, if you have a cell phone that takes pictures, take a picture of it with your cell phone. And then don't look at either one of them for a few minutes. Just, you know, clean up your paint palette or rearrange your workstation, whatever. Just don't look at the painting or the photo. And then after maybe 5-10 minutes, then look at the photo. That will kind of give you the same experience as walking away from it. It helps you see things that you don't really see when you're right up in it painting. I'm gonna leave quite a bit of the red right there, I think. All right, time to move on to some yellow. Oh, my yellow might be a little too dry. We can get a bit out of there. Now the yellow, we're gonna be even more selective. This is the hottest and brightest part of the lava, but as the lava comes out, it immediately starts to cool. It's not going to be as hot as this lava that's shooting up out of the top. So we might have some spots around the top and maybe in some of the thicker areas, but I think that as it comes down, we're going to have next to none, maybe a couple little points here and there. So I'm going to be pretty selective with this, just kind of dashing it on. Definitely not trying to cover all of that orange. Got a little bit of fresh paint because I actually want to come in, just kind of poke into it, get my paint, my yellow a little bit heavier because I don't want a lot of breaking in it, I've decided, because the heavier the paint is, the more intense it's going to seem, and that's what we want with this yellow. We want it to seem very bright, and especially compared to the cool colors in the mountain and in the sky. That's really going to make it kind of pop. Dashing it on here and there. Very selective about where I put it. Just little tiny points of it in here. And we are actually going to go one color brighter after this. Maybe I'll even bring just a little bit of yellow down where it's not connected to anything else. And see how that heavy body yellow is so opaque, it easily covers that color. So that's why I say if you're using the basics, you might have a little bit of a harder time. I don't think it'll be impossible. You'll just have to use your paint a lot thicker. Just kind of touching and letting my paint skip if it wants to. I'm not trying to draw lines. Don't try to draw, you know, this perfect line of the color in there. See, just like a tiny little point right there. Can't really even see it, but I think that it's enough to make that spot just kind of jump a little bit more. Nice and hot right here where we talked about the dip in the rock, where the lava is just kind of pouring out. Yeah, I think that painting lava like this, it really is very similar to making trees, you know, both in highlighting the bark, but also making the branches and, you know, just all of that. And I think that that happens a lot in art. You know, we start painting something and we're like, oh, I don't know how to paint this. But if you really pay attention to, you know, what is it shaped like? What does it do? You might find that really you can use the exact same technique that you use for something else on that. So it's like when we painted lightning a while ago and somebody said, oh, it's like painting an upside down tree. Exactly. This is kind of like painting an upside down tree too. So it's kind of like painting lightning. So, you know, rather than looking at everything you paint as something new that you have to learn, look at your tools that you already have, the things that you've already learned. You know, chances are you've got the ability to paint just about anything you could want to paint. It's just kind of up to connecting the dots at that point. If you've painted grass before and now you want to paint an animal, like animal fur, well, maybe your grass technique will translate well into painting animal fur. You know, experiment with it. It might just be different directions, different colors, but the basic layering and brushstroke principle might be exactly the same. It might be just what you're looking for. Just kind of take stock of what you already know and see how you can apply it to other paintings. I think that's probably good for my yellow. Let's go into the white. I'm gonna wipe off some of that yellow. I don't want all of that yellow on my brush. I'm gonna pick up white, and there's still a little yellow, so it's kind of a yellowy white, and that's perfectly fine. Now I'm gonna be super selective here in where I put this, and I'm only gonna put it in areas where I wanna say this is the hottest. See, I'm almost like scribbling. I kind of pretend like I'm writing in cursive, very, very small. And that's kind of the brush stroke that I'm doing, if that makes any sense. So I kind of move my hand as if I'm very casually writing quickly in cursive. Every once in a while you go back and you dot an I or you cross a T, all kinds of things. And this little bit of white is really what's going to make this lava seem nice and hot. So I really am only keeping it in this top portion. And absolutely not covering everything. They're just little accent spots in some of that yellow. Still keeping a hint of yellow in it though. Little tiny point of yellow, lay it down there, a little bit of white. Now, hopefully this is starting to look like really bright, glowing lava. Sometimes the illusions that we create are not necessarily with our brush strokes or anything else, it's with the colors that we choose. And really, I believe that this type of look is so effective because of all of the cool colors that we have in the background, both the sky and the mountain, and then these bright warm colors on top of it. It really makes it look like the surrounding area is dark, this mountain is very, very dark, and that this lava really is glowing, that it's shining with light. And I think that if we used very warm colors in the back and for the mountain, that we would lose that effect. It wouldn't really look like it was glowing. So I think that you could even do this as a day image. You know, you would just want to make sure, again, that the colors behind the lava are cool. You know, maybe very blue greens. That would probably help. And you could have like a daytime volcanic eruption. That would be kind of cool. Volcanoes erupt during the day too, I think. I'm pretty sure. I've never actually seen a volcano. I went to Mount St. Helens one time, but I've never seen Mount St. Helens. It was very, very foggy that day. It was so foggy that you couldn't see the mountain at all. So that's the closest I've ever come to seeing a volcano. I feel like I might be pretty happy with that. I might just take some tiny, tiny little points of this throughout some of these thicker areas, and then I think I might be done. I'll stand back and look at it before I decide for sure. Yeah, I feel like I'm done. I'm gonna go ahead and sign it. And there's your bright and hot volcano eruption. I can almost feel the heat radiating off of it. I hope you enjoyed painting this with me, and I would love to see how your painting turned out. I'm really interested to see if somebody does this in blues and greens rather than the standard reds and yellows of the lava. Remember, you can find me on Facebook and Instagram so that you can share your painting with me. All you have to do is search for Painting with Jane. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.